In the Bible, there's a prophecy, and that prophecy says that in the end of time, all these people that were exiled, that we call the lost tribes of Israel, will get up and come back to Israel. And it'll start happening all over in the four corners of the world. And they'll just get up and start moving back. And what if it was actually happening? Here you have this prophecy, and people are actually getting up. They may be in your own neighborhood, and they're packing their bags, and to you, they're just somebody else packing their bags and moving. But in actual fact, they're responding to some kind of biblical post-hypnotic suggestion. I'm not talking about 1,000 years. I'm talking about 2,700-year-old suggestion that they're responding to now. And we could actually film these people and match the prophecy with the events. And the reason it should matter is that because once they do what they have to do, they trigger the apocalypse.
On these altars, children were sacrificed in pagan rituals. Scripture tells us that the tribes of Israel deserted the God of their forefathers and worshipped idols in places like this. The prophet said that for this sin, the Israelite tribes would be conquered and exiled until the end of time, when they would be found and redeemed. Megiddo, a fortress city in northern Israel. It is known to the world as Armageddon, a name synonymous with the apocalypse. But it won't happen before the Israelite tribes who once lived here return. According to prophecy, the countdown to the apocalypse and final redemption begins when the tribes are found, one by one.
So this is the challenge before us. How are we going to find millions of people that no one has noticed? When I say find them, I don't mean discovering a people that's never made contact with Westerners. I mean taking very obscure pieces of a puzzle and going to very remote, sometimes dangerous places on the earth, and taking those pieces and putting them together and seeing, does this accord with the biblical prophecy? I have been on a journey, and I invite you to go on this journey with me.
In the early 1980s, I went to Africa to document the plight of the Falashas, the black Jews of Ethiopia. These people were caught in the midst of persecutions, war, and famine. In 1991, the Falashas made international headlines when they were airlifted by the Israeli Secret Service to Jerusalem. What was little noticed is that the Israelis acted only after the chief rabbi ruled that the Falashas were descendants of the lost tribe of Dan.
Can you imagine the lost tribes of Israel making front page news? Can you imagine the government of Israel acting on the words of rabbis who say this is the lost tribe of Dan, and suddenly modern aircraft swooping in to Civil War Ethiopia as people from ages ago are airlifted into modern Israel?
Seeing the Ethiopians in Jerusalem, I thought, was this just an anomaly? Or was the biblical prophecy beginning to unfold? Seven years after the Falasha airlift, in a tomato packing plant near the Gaza Strip, I came across a small group that most Israelis take for Thai guest workers. They are a people who come from the hill country on the India-Burma border. They say they are descendants of the lost tribe of Menashe, and there is at least one rabbi here who believes them.
We have to go and bring them before the Messiah arrives in Israel. Our tradition teaches us that in the end of days, the Jews, who are the descendants of the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, will bring the lost tribes to Israel so that they will participate in Messianic times.
I believe that the whole thing is in the realm of religious belief rather than in the realm of reality. That there is a strong necessity to find the tribes for religious theological reason, both Jewish and Christian. And those are the two religions that are active in tribe seeking, each one in its own way. And all the attempts to find them, I think, have no sound historical evidence. It is the belief that keeps the 10 lost tribes alive, not the people themselves.
Despite the skeptics, Rabbi Avichal has assisted hundreds of these people to emigrate to Israel and has supervised their formal return to Judaism. Can the rabbi be right? Is the key to the future submerged in these people's past? The story begins 2,900 years ago, when after Solomon's death, his biblical kingdom split into two. In the south, Judea, home to 3 tribes including Judah, which gave its name to modern-day Jews. In the north there was Israel, home to the people that would later be called the lost tribes of Israel. A 100 years after the prophets predicted the event, the Assyrian Empire bore down on the northern kingdom of Israel.
The Assyrians, they are considered to be the real heavies. I guess you could call them the stormtroopers, the Prussians. They created what many, in fact, would tell you was probably the most potent military machine of its age. That is, sometime from about the end of the second millennium BCE, they began this inexorable march from their headquarters in the upper reaches of the Tigris, what is now eastern Iraq, the borders with Iran. And year after year, campaign after campaign, they just marched westwards. They marched as far as Israel, as far as the coast.
In 721 BCE, the Assyrians put to the torch many Israelite cities and deported most of the population. Most scholars believe that the tribes were lost because in exile they could not have held on to their identities. They must have assimilated.
We are talking about 2,700 years ago. There are historical documentations, historical records, actually found in excavations from, say, the 5th century BC that record Israelite names in Assyria. So at that time, maybe they still existed there, or a trickle of them existed there. After that, there is nothing, no documentation. So if you look at it historically, all kinds of people were exiled and got lost. And I believe that the 10 tribes also got lost.
But what if they are not lost and have preserved the memory of their ancient origins? What if they are waiting in their millions for their prophesied return? The hill country where Burma meets India is home to the people called Manasseh or Manasseh, who are now claiming descent from the lost tribe of Menashe.
So we went there. And what we found there is a war zone. Over and over in pursuit of the tribes, we found ourselves in the middle of a war zone. And what's the war about? It's about territory and ethnicity. And these people that call themselves Manasseh are fighting a people called Naga, and the Naga are saying, their enemies are saying, you don't belong here. You know, and we know that you're not from here. Would you ever think that on the Indian-Burmese border, there's a tribal conflict, and being an Israelite is part of the issue?
This area is called Manipur. It swarms with insurrectionist groups, and the Indian government has responded by turning Manipur into a police state. The local mortuary receives daily deliveries of the victims of Naga violence. In response, the Manasseh have begun to organize an underground army.
My village was attacked. My own house was burnt, and my uncle was killed. They destroyed my village. Israelites are good fighters. We are good fighters. That is why we are not afraid. We are not afraid to fight. We feel we are warriors.
We obtained this never-before-seen footage from Manasseh guerrillas who are dedicated to setting up an independent Israelite state in India.
The flag of Jalangam, which is the flag for the future sovereign state, has the Star of David in the middle. One, because the Manasseh believe they are one of the lost tribes of Israel from the tribe of Manasseh. Secondly, the Star of David is a neutral figure or symbol. All the clans would find it acceptable.
Into this cauldron comes Rabbi Avichail. He's drawn here by the fact that for reasons no one can explain, thousands of locals are now claiming to be Israelites. The rabbi has been researching the lost tribes for more than 35 years. He firmly believes that the Manasseh are indeed remnants of the tribe of Menashe, sent into exile 2,700 years ago.
This particular tribe seems to have been a rather lowly tribe in the area, economically poor, socially on the lower scale of society, and to people like that, the idea that they may be related to some divine promise of a huge and glorious future may have a very big appeal. And when Rabbi Avichail came, he already found a tribe that has managed to convince itself that it belongs to the 10 lost tribes.
We believe to be a Jew is not by body. To be a Jew is by soul. So you can be sometime in all the generation to change your body here and there, but the soul remain after all Jewish soul. And I believe in all my heart that you people have Jewish soul.
I want to go to Israel as soon as possible so that I can worship my God in peace and without any obstacle.
Israel today do it very, very slowly. My opinion is the main thing to bring all Menashe, the 10 tribes, will be the main goal of Messiah.
Thousands of Manasseh have decided not to wait passively for the Messiah. They have applied to emigrate to Israel. Despite those who would challenge their Israelite claims, they continue to practice Judaism in virtual isolation from the rest of the Jewish world.
In this small place called Manipur, which is at the corner of India, we're still alive and we are Jews and we like to go back to the place where we belong. We would appreciate it if things become better for us and we're allowed to go to that place which is our fatherland, that is Israel.
If this is really happening, it should be happening everywhere. Because the prophecy is clear. It's not a few people here and there. Ezekiel talks about the staff of Judah being rejoined with the staff of Joseph. And the staff of Joseph are the 10 lost tribes of Israel. There's 1.5 million Menashe. That's a lot of people. Where are the rest? So we said, okay, let's go back to the ancient sources. Where did they go? Where did they go? The Assyrians, who destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and took the people into exile, had a propensity for making wall reliefs. And this is very fortunate for us, because it's almost like having someone with a video camera, a journalist with a video camera, present 2,700 years ago. Because after they destroyed the Israelites, they went home, created palaces, and created these huge wall reliefs showing the destruction.
You see them being killed, and you see them being taken prisoner, and you see them being deported. And it's a very clear difference. Obviously, killing is one thing. You see them being flayed alive. Taken prisoner, you only see men taken prisoner, and you see them being deported, you see them being deported in family units. So we've got a lot of evidence. They never deported people as just the men or just the women to be concubines or something. They deported families. They kept them together.
The only group of charioteers that the Assyrians retain intact as an elite unit of charioteers is an Israelite unit from Samaria. What this means is that they were appropriated by the core of the empire to the service of the center of the empire. The Israelite charioteers are retained intact.
The fact that they were kept together in military and family units gave us hope that perhaps they had survived the deportations after all.
That's a beautiful way of doing that. That's beautiful. I cannot say that it's impossible. No, I cannot say it's impossible. I would say it's very optimistic. People were thrown into nowhere amongst many other peoples, and we have no evidence whatsoever that anything survived the Assyrian melting pot.
Maybe the evidence lay elsewhere. We returned to the Assyrian reliefs, hoping that they could tell us their ancient story. From the Assyrian records, we learned that in the first assault, Assyria sacked 7 Israelite cities of the tribe of Naphtali and put the Ephtalites on the volatile border with Media. As the Assyrians lost ground to the Medes, the Israelites found themselves under Median rule in an empire that extended from modern Iran to Central Asia. Any Israelites living in Iran were later absorbed by mainstream Judaism. It was pointless to search here. Perhaps we would find the lost Israelites behind the former Median Empire, along the superhighways of the ancient world, across Uzbekistan, on the road to China. We picked up the trail in Uzbekistan, home to the legendary cities of Bukhara and Samarkand. Here we found ourselves in a forgotten region that had once been the prize of Alexander the Great and the Mongol warlord Genghis Khan. Founded over 2,500 years ago, Bukhara was the cultural center of the region.
From this place, one could go and trade in all directions. The city of Bukhara is really at the crossroads. The legendary Silk Route, which started in the 2nd century, came right through Bukhara. In the 12th century, the famous Jewish traveler Benjamin of Tudela wrote that there was a Hebrew tribe here which considered itself to be one of the lost tribes that were exiled by the Assyrians.
As late as the 19th century, British missionary and explorer Joseph Wolfe reported that the lost Israelites could still be found living in Bukhara. Legend has it that the most ancient tombs here date back to biblical times, but we could find no markings linking them to Israelites. Not far from these tombs is a Jewish community of uncertain origin. The first clue that they are related to the lost tribes is the name Issacharov, common in this area and nowhere else. Issachar is one of the lost tribes, and many of the people here, including the local rabbi, claim Issachar as an ancestor. The Issachar lead did not take us any further, so we explored the Mahala, the Jewish quarter, to see if there was a connection to the tribe of Naphtali, also exiled to this area. At first it seemed that all we could ascertain is that the community is very old.
For many hundreds of years we've been preparing matzah in this oven. It is a very, very old custom. These customs are ancient, thousands of years old. When God gave us Jerusalem, we were preparing matzah by hand, just like this.
While the women prepare unleavened bread for Passover, the men slaughter a sheep in accordance with the biblical law. The tradition of the Paschal lamb is as old as the Bible itself. A sheep is slaughtered with an extra sharp knife in one quick cut. The blood is then drained and removed. At the time of the Exodus, a bush would be dipped in the blood and smeared on doorposts, identifying those homes as Israelite.
I'm rendering this animal kosher, as we have always done.
How are you doing that?
I'm discarding the sciatic nerve here, in accordance with Jewish law.
When they were first discovered, they didn't claim to be Jews, they claimed to be Israelites. It's only in the last few hundred years that they've integrated themselves into the body of the world Jewish community. And the Bukharan Jews are important because they tip you off that the history of the lost tribes is a hidden history. That there are political reasons why their history would have been hidden. So for example, in Bukhara, in Uzbekistan, this country that was part of the former Soviet Union, anything Israelite was hidden and locked up because it was not in the interests of the local authorities to say that Israelites were here before the supposedly indigenous people. And in Bukhara, we actually had a guide who ran the Bukharan Museum who was torn between pursuing the truth and looking out for himself in a political climate where it's still policy to hide anything Israelite. So for example, he gave us access to the basement of the Bukharan Museum. On top in the museum you have all the official history, and in the basement, locked up, you have anything Israelite. And what's in this musty, dank basement? Prayer books, silver platters with Hebrew alphabet on them, locked up. Torah scrolls, Bible scrolls are locked up as if they're some kind of state secret. Anything with a Hebrew letter, anything signifying some kind of historical Israelite presence, locked up. And then when we asked him about Israelites, he didn't want to talk directly about Israelites, but he said, you know, there were these people here that ruled Central Asia for 200 years, and they were called Ephthalites.
From our recent digs, we've learned that in the 6th century, Bukhara was the capital of a mighty kingdom of Semites, which also ruled parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Now, in the 19th century, the Russian writer Shubinsky believed that it was in this region that the Israelites were settled. But the people who ruled the area were called Hephthalites. And right up to the present day, we are still debating the origins of the Ephthalite dynasty of Bukhara.
Who are these Hephthalites? Have you ever heard of Hephthalites? Any Hephthalites here? I don't want to offend anybody. Looking in the Britannica, and I found Hephthalites. And what does the first line say? It says, this much named and enigmatic tribe ruled Central Asia in the 5th and 6th centuries. Are we following here? Much named, many names, and enigmatic, mysterious tribe. Now, why is a tribe that ruled Central Asia for 200 years mysterious? You'd think you'd get to know them after the first 100 years of rule. The second sentence was revelatory as well, because it says they were known to medieval writers as Ephthalites and Nephtalites.
It seemed to us that the Nephtalites must have been the lost tribe of Naphtali, but we wanted some hard archaeological evidence. We went to the Tashkent Institute of Archaeology, where we gained access to a restricted facility containing a treasure of ancient artifacts. Among them, 2,200-year-old potsherds. Clearly displayed on the ancient clay is Aramaic script, the day-to-day language of the Israelite tribes. Here we also met Professor Usmanova, a semi-retired archaeologist.
And what does she have? she has wrapped in a tea towel, a 1,700-year-old religious ritual object with Hebrew writings, with an Israelite name, with ram's horns, a religious object of Israelite origin from exactly the area that the lost tribes went to 1,000 years after they supposedly disappeared. Unbeknownst to most Israelis, the majority of Bukharan Jews have now emigrated to Israel. But the chain has been broken. They do not know that they may be descendants of the Nephtalites.
They say that we are descendants of the lost tribes, but we don't know which one. All we know is that we are Jewish. That's what is important. I hope that with God's help the redemption will come, and with it the ingathering of the tribes. Then we'll know which tribe we belong to. Until then, we identify with the tribe of Judah. If by my laws you walk and my commandments you guard and do them, I will give your rain in due season. And you shall eat your bread to the full, and you will dwell in your lands safely, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I am God, your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, that you shall not be slaves to them. And I have broken the bonds of your yoke, that you may go upright.
Back in Bukhara, it seems that the Nephtalites, a once mighty tribe of rulers, have been reduced to a tiny community of a few thousand who did not flee after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Once, you could find these people in dozens of towns dotting the area. Now, there are only a few isolated Bukharan Jewish enclaves, including this one, in the jewel of Central Asia, Samarkand, a city with a history dating back more than 2,500 years. The word Kand in the local dialect means city. Samarkand translates as the city of the Sumerians. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. We continued along the Silk Route towards China. The city of Kaifeng was the capital city of the Han Dynasty. Following the Nephthalite trail, we learned that the Chinese records say that the Nephtalites were here. They were labeled Jews or Yuda by the Chinese. It is virtually impossible to identify a Jew in Kaifeng today. But there was one government official who was willing to talk.
There was a Jewish community, but now there is no more Jewish community. There is no Jewish community anymore. Only a few families. This is the synagogue, former site of a synagogue.
Okay. And can you write also here the two family names?
Only for your reference.
I understand.
And most likely, you will be refused.
No, 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 no.
We did not find lost tribes in China waiting in their millions. But could the last Jews of Kaifeng help us in our quest?
这给他一路他来。你是哪个理解？不是，我只是他这个人。300年以前。
About 300 years ago, our synagogue ceased to exist. Without the synagogue, there was no place for the Jews to congregate. Without a congregation, there were no more rabbis. Without the congregation, without the rabbis, without the religious rituals or readings of the scriptures, there was no more worship. Nothing was left.
Nonetheless, to this day, there are Chinese people in Kaifeng whose identity papers still describe them as Jews, Yuda.
Yudai, this is his name, right?
Yes.
Does he think he is a Jew? 他问你现在你自不自己还感觉你是好是犹太人？
当然是这样，是这样。
Yes, 是。
我在我民族意识还是有的，民族意识，民族意识。
Amidst the mementos of the last Jews of Kaifeng, we thought, is it possible that the Manasseh of India and Burma are the remnants of an unknown exodus across Central Asia and China? Perhaps it was time to further investigate the Manasseh claim.
Since time memorial, we long for this Israel, and we have sympathy for Israelis. Nobody told us to feel like that. I don't know how it comes. You know, whenever there is earthquake, then the eldest man of the house, he will run out of the house and shout, "Oh, we children of Manasseh are alive. We children of Manasseh are alive." He will shout at least 3-4 times at the top of his voice. Then he will come back. Then he said, "Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry." Then he will tell us, our ancestor has shaken the earth to find out whether his descendants are still alive or not.
There's something very poetic about the possibility that the Manasseh of Northeast India are the descendants of an unknown, long-forgotten Israelite trek across China into Burma, finally ending up in India. And when we were with the elders of the Manasseh, they pulled out a map that illustrated exactly the journey we had suspected, showing them starting in Israel, going across Central Asia to China, down into Burma and into India. And in fact, they went further and started singing a song in an archaic form of their language. A song not of the unknown Exodus, but this time a song of the known Exodus. The Exodus with which we're all familiar. The Exodus of the Red Sea parting. The Exodus of eating quail that falls from heaven, water coming from the rock, and the enemies of the Israelites drowning in the Red Sea.
Surajula galeidoe suna sumang zaname lomin vake.
The first verse is telling that the big Red Sea is parted. Then the second verse goes, we are going on foot across that parted sea. Then the water came up together again and the enemies were being swallowed by the sea. They were being guided by a flame at night and a cloud during the day. And then this one pointed that you please pick up those birds being scattered there and then draw the water which is flowing out of the rock.
Though their history demonstrates that their ancestors passed through China, the Manasseh insists that they are not Chinese and that they have preserved customs which are distinctly biblical.
If we were born China, then how come we are not following the religion of the Chinese people. The Chinese people religion is broadly two. One is Confucian and another one is Buddhist. In the two religions, there is no animal sacrifice. But when I was a small boy, we kill some animal. Then we put big plate. The blood of the animal was set there. Then the priest took some bushes, branches, and dip it, and thus painted the doorpost.
In 1894, Protestant missionaries came to these hills. Although they thought they were converting pagans, it seems that the people here were easily persuaded to embrace Christianity because they saw elements of their own history and mythology in the biblical stories told to them. The Manasseh always believed that they were from a far-off land, kept many biblical practices, and worshipped a single God.
What are you doing? Just a minute, I'll share something.
When we learned that Manasseh eat pork, we thought these could not be Israelites. But interestingly, they mixed the pork with ashes and regard it as a meal of shame to be eaten outside the home.
These are the ashes. We'll put ashes and then they'll put water in here. But this is what we call it soam. Inside this, they used to put pork meat inside it. And then they ferment it and then it becomes smelly. When it becomes smelly, they take out this portion and then we take it and then we put it and then we boil it.
And is that meal a sign of mourning?
It's not a meal of mourning, but I think it shows us that we have been cursed. The reason why we have been thrown out from the land of our ancestor. But according to our forefathers, once you make this meat and the pork in here, that means you have made this thing unclean. If people ask us how long you have been eating this thing, this has been a curse from generation to generation, so we are still using this. So we're waiting for Shiloh to come and deliver us from all these things.
Shiloh will redeem us. Now that's a very strange construction because Jehovah is the God of Israel and Shiloh, or Shiloh in Hebrew, was the holy place for the northern tribes, for the lost tribes. And Shiloh seems to be a fusion of those two terms. Shiloh will redeem. And the same person who said that appeared to us in a talit, in a prayer shawl, which looked identical to the prayer shawls that the Jews wear all over the world.
This shawl is known as tolopuan. So this tolopuan is a long traditional clothes worn by our forefathers when they make a vow. Suppose if they make a vow of killing one mithun or a tiger, without killing a tiger, they will not come home once they make the vow with wearing this shawl. In Mizo, tolo means never return back, no turning back. These are made with fringes.
The Bible commanded the Israelites to tie a blue thread to the corners of their garments.
So there's always a blue thread at the corner?
Yes, there's always a blue thread.
These people have had a problem in that the Jewish world couldn't relate to them. No one answered their appeals. No one answered their cry. About 50 years ago, a man named Chala, who was one of their leaders, they regard him as a prophet, told them that the time had come for them to return to the land of their forefathers. Many got up and were willing to follow him. Nobody said, "What land of our forefathers are you talking about?" They all knew that the Holy Land was their ancestral home.
People called my father a prophet, and in a sense he was. It was revealed to him that we were Israelites. But he wasn't a prophet in the sense that Jeremiah, Ezekiel, or Hosea were prophets. No, he wasn't a prophet in that way. But in order for us to realize who we are, he did have a revelation. God did not want us to be lost forever.
Daniel Benjamin's father was a follower of Chala. Like Chala, he sought to emigrate to Israel. Though in his lifetime the Israeli authorities ignored Daniel's father, he was buried facing Jerusalem.
My father wanted very much to immigrate to Israel. He was, in fact, one of the first to return to Judaism, to start practicing Judaism in this part of India. He was a leader of our community. He also taught me a lot about Israel, about Zionism, and about Judaism.
After Chala's death, some of his followers concluded that maybe they should return to Judaism before returning to Zion. Since they were reluctant to completely abandon Christianity, they opted for a homegrown version of Messianic Judaism, a Jews for Jesus type of worship. But for some of the Manasseh, the call of their ancestors eventually proved too strong to ignore.
Look at this picture. A picture which shows how the Torah is being brought from Ethiopia to Israel. See how great it is? The Ethiopian Jews were like us. They had great reverence for the covenant and studied the Torah with great dedication. They loved Torah. Here they enter Jerusalem, bringing their Torah with them. With great joy, we too will soon enter Jerusalem.
Thousands of Manasseh have now forsaken Christianity and adopted Orthodox Judaism.
Could these people really be Menashe? Because if they are, we may have identified as many as 4 of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Menashe, Dan being the Ethiopians, and Issachar and Naphtali among the Bukharan Jews of Central Asia. And if we were right to think of the Bukharans as the descendants of Naphtali, then maybe we should be looking for Zebulon, because Zebulon was the brother tribe of Naphtali in ancient Israel. And history records that at the same time as the Nephtalites were ruling Central Asia in the 5th and 6th centuries, another tribe was ruling parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. This tribe was called Zavula. So maybe we could find in the Indian subcontinent, not on the border of Burma, descendants of the Zavula, just as we had found descendants of the Nephtalites in Central Asia.
In the course of our research, we repeatedly came across a little-known group in India that could not be easily related to other Jews. So we made our way to Bombay in search of Zebulon. Bombay is home to 8 million Hindus and 1 million Muslims. Here we found a community numbering about 5,000 that by all accounts should have assimilated into the dominant culture long ago. And though they do not call themselves by any particular tribal name, significantly, like the lost tribes and unlike other Jews, they call themselves the children of Israel, not Judah.
I am not Yehudi, I am Bene Israel. Yehudis, those Jews who migrated to India from Baghdad. My family is Bene Israel.
"300 years ago, a Jewish merchant traveling through the coastal region was stunned to see Indian peasants chanting Jewish prayers. Fascinated, he stopped to inquire as to how they knew these prayers, and was shocked when they replied that they were Israelites who had lived in India from ancient times. Skeptical of these claims, the merchant visited a village and presented the Bnei Israel with an assortment of fish to be made into a meal, some kosher, some not. When he saw that the villagers knew which fish were kosher, he was convinced that they were an Israelite community, and he helped them return to Judaism. Unique to the Bnei Israel community is the Melida ceremony, which is a kind of offering of rice, scented flowers, and fruit. Though they had forgotten the reasons behind some of their practices, the Bnei Israel had clung to them as something precious to be passed through the generations.
They were observing certain rules and regulations of Judaism. And when they got an opportunity of being told as to what the meaning was of that particular thing, they were only too happy. Why should they lose? And nobody forced us. If they had said, no, you must become Hindus or you must become Mohammedans, but nobody ever forced us because we were such a minority in the whole population of India. Nobody worried about us.
But what if they were not always a tiny minority? What if the mysterious rulers of northern India in the 5th and 6th centuries were indeed the lost tribe of Zebulun?
The Bene Israel community's own historian, his name was Chaim Kar, wrote a book about the Bene Israel at the turn of the 20th century. He believed that they are descendants of the lost tribes. He thought the tribes were scattered to the ends of the earth, and some made their way to India. He talks about various practices they have, and compares them to the rituals of the Jerusalem temple, for example, the Melida ceremony. He argues that in an earlier period, they even had sacrifices like those in the temple. But these are all speculations. There is no documentation or proof.
After nearly 3 millennia, there may not be proof, but there is a tantalizing hint. The holiest site for the Bnei Israel of India is a rock outcrop 100 kilometers south of Bombay. Here we learned that the most revered figure for the Bnei Israel is not King David, or Abraham, or even Moses. It is the prophet Elijah.
The Jews in India believe that the prophet Elijah went to heavens from this place. The mark of his chariot can be seen on the stone rock that we are standing on. The hooves can be seen laid down there, and they said that his chariot slipped here, and on the top of the mountains over there you can see another sign of the hooves of his horses.
Using the rock as a kind of altar, the Bnei Israel make an offering of coconut on the mark of Elijah's chariot. This veneration of Elijah is suggestive, since Elijah was the prophet of the Israelite tribes that came to be lost. But how would they have gotten here? The community has its own myth of origin.
2,000 years ago, a ship of Israelis got caught in a storm, and the ship was wrecked on the coast of Bombay. And only 7 couples survived that particular shipwreck. And the 7 couples landed at a place known as Navgaon. And we are supposed to be the offshoot of those 7 couples.
It makes more sense that those Israelites came not directly from Israel, but from the north. That is, the area of the Silk Route. Israelites of the tribes exiled by the Assyrians became involved in the silk trade, trading along one of the branches of the ancient route that became known as the Silk Route. I believe that these Israelites got as far as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Kashmir. From there, they got to where the Persian Gulf meets the Indian Ocean, and then, in the course of their trade, they may have sailed along the Indian coast.
Whichever way they got here, the Bene Israel can still point to the graves where the survivors of the shipwreck are said to be buried. It now seems that we can draw a plausible link between the Bene Israel and seafarers coming from the north. But does this prove that the ancient rulers of northern India had any connection whatsoever to the lost tribe of Zebulun?
We have coins that say Javula on them. We have recorded history of their capital city called Baruch, which in Hebrew means blessed. We know that the title of their king was Mir HaGola, which in Hebrew means light of the exile. And we know the name of the king, their most famous king, was Torah Mana, which in Hebrew or Hindi means, or seems to mean, belief in the Torah, faith in the books of Moses. So unless these were all coincidental, we could speculate that the Zavula of India and Pakistan were really the lost tribe of Zebulun.
As if responding to an ancient call, many of the Bene Israel of Bombay have returned to their ancestral home in Israel. They gravitate towards Elijah's cave and continue to demonstrate their reverence for the biblical prophet. Elijah's cave is in the old territory of Zebulun.
Standing in this cave, I must confess that I felt that I was in the Twilight Zone, because I was among people who were acting out a script that was written almost 3,000 years ago. And they seemed to be fixated on the prophet that warned the tribes of their exiles and promised them redemption in the end of days. But there was a problem here. The prophecy speaks of millions, and this was a small group. The biggest tribe we had found was Menashe, 1.5 million. Perhaps the clue was there, because the brother tribe of Menashe was Ephraim. So perhaps we had to look for Ephraim, and for that we had to go back to our treasure map, we had to go back to the Bible.
In the 8th century BC, the biblical account of the facts is fully reliable about the reasoning, about the whys and hows, that is something else. But about what happened, we can fully trust the biblical account. It is fully parallel to what we found in archaeological excavations.
I look at things as a believer. For me, the scriptures are paramount. In the Book of Kings, we find in several places references to where the tribes were exiled to. Also in the Book of Chronicles. It says in these texts that they were exiled to 5 places. First, the mountains of the Medes. This is in the direction of Kurdistan and the Caucasus. Second, the river Gozan. Third, Hala. Fourth, Harat. And last, Havor. Where are these places?
In modern Syria, there are places that roughly correspond to the biblical locations. There is a river called Havor, and nearby there is a city called Gozan.
It's very interesting. A few documents were found recently in the city on the river Habur. called Durkatlimu, a German excavation, and in 1993 they were published. Only 4 documents, I think, and in 1 or 2 of them there are Israelite names. One of them is Hezekiah. Now the date is the first year 2 or what, of Nebuchadnezzar. So that means they are not Judeans. They definitely are Israelites. Israelites in the area of Habur, where they should be.
Today there are no Israelites waiting by the river Chavor. But what if they moved east, taking their place names with them? One of the passes between Afghanistan and Pakistan is known to the world as the Khyber Pass. The Khyber Pass is one of the most lawless and dangerous places on earth. It is the heart of Pakistan's northwest frontier, the Wild West of the East. The first thing one notices is that the Pakistani government has no real authority here. The only way to obtain safe passage is to travel with an armed escort from the ruling people in the area, the Pathans. They have guarded the Khyber Pass for more than 2,000 years, driving away Genghis Khan, the British Army, and most recently, the Soviets.
In Hebrew, it's known as Chavor Pass, the same name as in the Bible. And next to the Khyber Pass, there's a city called Peshawar in Pakistan. Peshawar means the same thing, the Chavor Pass. So we thought, could the Khyber be Chavor in the Bible? If it is, there should be here a river called Gozan. And right there, flowing into the Kabul River, is the river Ghazni. If this is Chavor, we thought, there should be somewhere around here the city Harat. And 300 kilometers away, in Afghanistan, there's a city Harat.
The whole world knows this area as a hotbed of Islamic fundamentalism. There are 15 million Pathans and not a single Jew among them. But we set out to investigate whether under the Islamic surface lies an Israelite past. The first clue was the fact that the Pathans claimed to descend from Afghan, son of King Saul of Israel. From their perspective, Afghanistan is an Israelite name. At worship, they seem like any other Muslims. When studying the Quran, however, they rock their bodies in the manner of Jews. To this day, it is an ancient code called Pukhtunwali, rather than Islamic law, which commands their ultimate loyalty.
It is said about Pushtun, Pushtun is really is a fifth religion itself. Is not. We have got our own code of conduct, and not that whatever your Quran says, Pushtun all believe in that. We don't do much of the things which are not conveyed by Quran really. That's why it is said, it is a proverb that Pushtun nim Quran namani. Or Pukhto pinzam mazhab de wali. You know.
Pukhtuwali, the code of the Pukhtu. And what is this Pukhtuwali? It's basically Old Testament law in a kind of unforgiving way, where you don't have any kind of rabbinical softening of it. Eye for an eye means eye for an eye, literally. Adultery, you're finished.
If there is a conflict between your own Pukhtunwali law and Islam, Which did the Pathans choose?
Our customs are those of the Pushtun, or Pathan. There are 11 Pathan tribes in the Khyber. We all have the same customs. The main law here is the Islamic Sharia. But we Pathan follow our own specific Pukhtunwali customs. For example, according to Islam, there must be established evidence for the conviction of adultery. You cannot convict anyone without sufficient evidence of fact. But according to Pukhtunwali, if there is even the slightest suspicion of an illegitimate relationship between a man and a woman, both are convicted and killed. The matter is closed, and there is nothing left to discuss.
As in the Bible, the Pathans still engage in animal sacrifices for religious purposes.
I am of the Musahel, the people of Moses. We make sacrifices of sheep. For example, at a wedding festival, our elders would sacrifice 4 sheep. Today, when times are good, a man can sacrifice 10 sheep. We make these sacrifices to please God and the people too. Also, some people used to light oil lamps on Friday nights to ask for forgiveness and blessings from God. Such are our traditions.
We are in a country that is supposedly dominated by Muslims, but not Muslims, just any Muslims, Muslim fundamentalism. And yet we come face to face with people that say we are Musahel. We are from the people of Moses. And as we travel among these people who look like they stepped off the pages of the Bible, Semitic faces, long beards, biblical garb, prayer shawls, and as the evidence mounted, we could not help but feel that maybe here among the Pathans of Afghanistan and Pakistan, we would find the answers to our quest. We were astounded to learn that the Pathans adhere to biblical laws that were thought to have disappeared thousands of years ago. As in the Bible, those accused of manslaughter can escape to designated cities of refuge.
It is mentioned in our old books that if you kill someone unintentionally, then you can flee to a designated place of refuge. Our books tell us that Moses ordered Joshua to establish cities of refuge and told the people that they should honor them. Today, we educated people think it is backwards to protect a criminal in this way, but the people in those areas of refuge look upon the matter as holy. To protect a fugitive is the sacred job of the elders. They treat him as their guest.
It seems the Pathans are trapped in time, tenaciously adhering to their ancient ways. They've literally created a wall between themselves and the outside world. They live in these extended family compounds, their women hidden inside. As in the Bible, the Pathan women observe a code of modesty which rarely allows them to emerge.
I asked the Pathan, how could you have love songs when you keep your women hidden? It's what, a man singing a song to someone in the kitchen from the other room, the dining room? He said no, he laughed and he said, all our love songs take place at wells. The only legitimate place for a woman in modesty to be seen is at the well. And immediately it struck me that every one of the biblical romances happens at a well. Moses meets Zipporah at a well, right? Jacob meets Rachel and Leah at the well. Rebecca for Isaac is met at the well. It's always at the well.
To enter the Pathan marketplaces is to step back in time. Defying all probabilities, the Pathans still live in tribal groups with Israelite names. Rabbani is similar to the tribe of Reuven, Levani, the tribe of Levi, and Shinwari, the tribe of Shimon. One Pathan tribe known as Gadun is very small in numbers, not unlike the lost tribe of Gad. Interestingly, the most numerous tribe among the Pathans is Afridi, and the most numerous tribe in ancient Israel was Ephraim. There is even a sub-tribe called Waziri, known for wearing its hair long. In biblical times, Naziri, such as Samson, also did not cut their hair.
So you have Reuven, Gad, Ephraim, Shimon. 4 more tribes. So we'd actually located 9 of the tribes. Or let me put it differently. We think we located 9 of the tribes. If we haven't located 9 of the tribes, then it's a very strange coincidence going on that you have all these people with biblical names, with biblical practices, with an Israelite memory, exactly where they should be according to the biblical map. If someone can come up with another explanation, I'm open to it, but I couldn't understand it.
There are people living among the Pathans who claim descent from the Assyrians and still preserve an oral tradition of the conquest of Israel.
Our tradition is that 2,700 years ago, my people conquered Israel and took the tribes there to the areas we ruled: Iran, Turkey, Armenia, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. The Israelites were taken to all of these places. They acted as our servants. They acted as tutors for the Assyrian children. They were also used in the army to help Assyria in warfare.
When I was young and had no beard, my grandfather's uncle died at the age of 115. We called him Baba, or grandfather. He used to say that we are the children of Israel. I was young, and at that age people forget things. They don't care much about history or talk of this kind. But now I would like to know, what are our origins? Where do we come from?
Our grandfathers always told us that we are from the Bene Israel, the children of Israel. They said the Jews are as Pathan as we are.
It's clear that a Judaic memory persists, but were there ever people here who openly identified with Judaism?
If you look up Harat in Encyclopedia Judaica, for example, you'll find 1 or 2 paragraphs. If you look up a Western Jewish community, you'll find pages and pages and pages. And when you look up Harat, it says the Jewish community may have been in Harat for somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years. They're talking about a community that lived somewhere for at least 1,000 years, and there's a paragraph or 2 on them. What does this tell us? It tells us that they're lost to our consciousness, that they've fallen off the Western radar screen.
In Harat, we find this cemetery covered with Stars of David and Hebrew script. For at least 1,000 years, it served one of the oldest continuous Jewish communities in the world. The Jews of Harat are no more, The last of them left in the late 1980s following the Soviet invasion. The country is now torn by civil war, and yet a Pathan tribesman agrees to take us to one of the old synagogues. For hundreds of years, people entered this house of prayer through the grand doorways leading into its beautiful sanctuary. Today we enter through an artillery hole blasted by Soviet shells. There is now a tiny community of Afghani Jews in Israel. Like the Bukharans, they are largely unknown here. They remember their former Pathan neighbors as not quite Jewish, but perhaps related to them in some way.
They were the ones who wore these prayer shawls, four-cornered garments like we do. And they didn't really know what they were, and they used to be surprised to see us wearing similar things. They would say to us, "You're Jews? How could you be Jews?" They'd be surprised. I remember them coming from the border areas, from the mountains, from Pakistan, places like Jalalabad. And I remember people said that to this day they still lit candles on the Sabbath. They would put the candles under these baskets and didn't know why they were doing it. They had all these traditions they didn't know the origins of. Except they said, that is what our forefathers did.
Did they think they were Jewish?
They thought they were more Jewish than us.
The prophets say that equal numbers of Israelites and Judeans will herald the Messiah. Interestingly, the number of Pathans and Jews in the world is virtually identical. The prophecy also foretells that it is Menashe and Ephraim that will take the lead in the return. In India, we had encountered the Menashe. If we were right, here among the Afridi, we had come face to face with Ephraim. However, before we could accept that the end of days was upon us, we needed more proof. On the road to Armageddon, it now seemed appropriate that our journey take us through a minefield. We needed harder evidence that the Pathans were of the lost tribes, so we went to the Afghani city of Kandahar, where in the 1950s a stone covered in ancient script was discovered. During the Soviet invasion, this stone was buried under rubble and surrounded by mines. Here, red dots mark undetonated mines, which we skirted to get to the site. "2,300 years ago, the Buddhist emperor Ashoka put up propaganda pillars throughout his empire. Until the Kandahar discovery, it was thought that these stones were always written in Sanskrit. But the stone buried here is written in Aramaic. In other words, the people then living here spoke in the everyday language of the Israelite tribes. We came here with a local elder in the hope of photographing it, but in its present state, that proved impossible.
It's under here. The stone is very big and there is ancient writing all over it. Same hard surface as this one, but no one can get to it now. This is definitely the place. There's no point in looking any further.
We did look further. We were tipped off that across the border in Pakistan, there was another stone rarely mentioned by Western scholars.
Look at that. There it is, right over there.
What is it? What is it?
Here, the stone was accessible. To our surprise, we discovered that it too was not written in Sanskrit, but in the Aramaic alphabet.
I see all the letters, the Aleph, the Ain, and I'm standing in front of this 2,300-year-old postcard from the Lost Tribes. And when we pack up our gear and we go, and I'm like in shock, because I didn't expect to find it. I was thinking it's in Kandahar. I didn't know there was another one here. And there's two more in places we didn't go. And one has on it the Hebrew month of Elul. So then this guide comes up to me and they told me, don't say you're Jewish, don't say anything, because people here are very Muslim, they may not take kindly to you. So he says, why were you able to read that? And I feel, I don't want to lie to this guy. And I said, because I'm a Jew. And this person, who's supposed to be my enemy, leans over with tears in his eyes, embraces me, and says, then you are my brother.
So maybe it was happening. Maybe the end of time was unfolding. I was standing there and I got goosebumps. I said, wait a minute, is this it? Am I making a film, or am I turning into the reporter from Armageddon? But then something struck me. We never found people who claimed to be Cohens, priests. And that's a big problem, because if we're really analyzing prophecy, return of the tribes leads to Messianic times. Messianic times leads to the rebuilding of the temple of God in Jerusalem, and that leads to the renewed rituals that take place there, and that requires a ritually pure caste of priests. And there are none among the tribes, and in Western Jews, none that can claim that they are ritually pure descendants of this priestly class. So what's going on here? On the one hand, it seems that prophecy is unfolding, and on the other hand, key characters in the biblical drama are missing.
Perhaps we had stumbled on some kind of eternal punishment. Preserved in their tribal units on the edges of deserts, the lost Israelites were waiting for a redemption that would never come. Or perhaps everything we thought we had found was a passing mirage. There was one lead we hadn't followed, one tribe whose descendants we had not encountered, the tribe of Asher. Since the Cohen priests were not living among the other tribes, perhaps if we located Asher, we would find the key to the Cohen enigma.
Is it possible that there's a little enclave somewhere of pure Cohens kept there until the blast of the great horn? The tribes have come home. The heavenly trumpets will call them out and say, do your priestly duty. For that, we went looking to the place that Asher would be. They were seafarers, and they were in alliance with the Canaanites. They sailed the seas together. And the biggest Phoenician or Canaanite colony was in Carthage, modern Tunisia. So we went to the one place we hadn't been to look for the one tribe that we had made no contact with, and just a few hundred kilometers down the road, off the coast of Tunisia, there's an island. And on that island, there's a community that have been there since biblical times.
The name of the island is Gerba. It is home to a Jewish community that Tunisians value for its silversmiths.
Most historians maintain the theory that the Jewish community in Gerba is the oldest community in Jewry in the whole world. Some of them, they say that the Jewish community was established even before the construction of the first temple.
What we now learned is that the community is split into two distinct quarters. One for Spanish Jews who arrived here in the 16th century, and one made up not of Asherites, but of Cohens, and no one else.
There is a small quarter on the island near the ancient synagogue. There is a bigger Jewish neighborhood called the Large Quarter. The larger quarter is mainly made up of Jews who arrived here after their expulsion from Spain. Also, other Jews of various ethnic backgrounds came to live there. The smaller quarter, on the other hand, is made up essentially of Cohen priests who arrived here after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem in biblical times.
I am from the Joseph Cohen family. I have it from my father and my father's father that our tradition is that we came from the priestly neighborhood. We are Cohens, and it is 2,000 years that we have been living here on this tiny island.
The story goes that this community was founded in biblical times by temple priests that quarreled with the religious hierarchy in Jerusalem. Here, they found a place of refuge, setting up the Gerba synagogue, which locals still consider one of the holiest sites in Judaism. According to the Cohen's tradition, the Gerba contains a treasure trove of gold and silver relics, destined for use by the Cohen priests in the future Jerusalem temple to be erected after the apocalypse. The sacred treasure is supposedly buried beneath the shrine. In a crawl space under the main sanctuary, we did not find any relics. What we did find, however, is the foundation stone whose original inscriptions, if there were any, had been covered by the black soot of countless candles. Buried treasure or not, what is clear is that the Cohens of Gerba have maintained a communal priestly tradition found nowhere else in the world.
You know, Gerba is the island of Cohen priests. All are Cohens.
Are you a Cohen?
Yes, and so is he.
When did you Cohens get here?
With Ezra the scribe in biblical times, it's a heritage passed on from generation to generation. We are some of the very few Kohanim who have the authentic priestly lineage from those days up to the present.
The Asherites had eluded us, but they did lead us to the Cohens. It appears that if needed, temple priests are available to bring in the Messianic age, ensuring that the return of the tribes would not be in vain.
There is a divine promise in the Bible that the tribes will return, that they will be united, that they will prosper and grow. And this is a promise that was uttered by many of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, in very flowery language, in very nice metaphors like in Ezekiel. But now there is a flaw. There is a promise hanging there which has not been fulfilled.
If the divine promise is fulfilled, millions believe that this place, Armageddon, will be at the center of events. It is here that long ago Israelite tribes put up one of their fiercest battles against the Assyrians. But the new age will be heralded only when the descendants of those ancient warriors return. Daniel Benjamin is one of the few who have made it from the India-Burma border to Israel. If he is from the lost tribe of Menashe, he is one of the first Israelites to serve in a Jewish army in nearly 3,000 years.
The very first time I came here, all my thoughts, everything that was in my mind, was about my father, of blessed memory, who passed to the next world before he got the opportunity to come here, to our country. So the first time I arrived in this place, I cried in my heart. My dream is that every one of the Bene Menashe, at least 1 million or 2, will come here with God's help. Our young people will then go into the army and will build the land of Israel, and in the end, Messiah will come and rebuild the Holy Temple. I pray for this. I pray that the ingathering takes place and that Messiah will lead it.
Seeing Daniel pray next to an Ethiopian Israeli, I couldn't help but wonder if the story had come full circle, if the tribes of Dan and Menashe had begun the long prophesied return of the lost Israelites.
The lost tribes of Israel are no longer lost. The lost tribes of Israel have never been lost. What was lost is our consciousness. What was lost is our sensitivity to parts of the world that are not Western. We were lost to them. They've never been lost to themselves.
Long ago, the Israelites were given a prophetic promise that once atonement had been made, there would be a bright messianic future, and the staff of Judah would be rejoined with the staff of Joseph, the tribes finally reunited. These people now believe that their nearly 3,000-year exile is over, and that their redemption is at hand. Celebrating with their rabbi, they proclaim not the beginning of the end, but the beginning of a new beginning.